I'm Mark Gagan and you're listening to the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Advantage Go. Pick and choose your own best-of-breed insurtech and data providers with Advantage Go's ecosystem. At first glance, today's guest might have an unenviable job. That's because that job entails trying to find the common ground between the hundreds of Lloyd's brokers, some of whom are extremely large, and very many of whom are very small and very specialist indeed. Chris Croft, the CEO of the London and International Insurance Brokers Association, LIIBA, is someone who I see and meet constantly out in the marketplace, and is someone I've been meaning to get on the podcast for some time. That's because he's one of those people that if you didn't already know, a mutual acquaintance would suggest that you meet. LIIBA is a unique trade body and lobbying group because its membership operates globally, and so blends a core remit looking after broker interests in the London market with an important role representing wholesale specialist brokers on the global stage. And Chris is a unique character. He's technically and intellectually very strong, but combines this with a down-to-earth good humour and sense of fun that is infectious. In this podcast, we focus on the key role that Lloyd's brokers play in innovation and how this role is often underappreciated and misunderstood by regulators across the globe. We also get up to speed with all the regulatory goings-on and market reform programmes in the UK, Europe and beyond. After a listen, you'll have learned a lot, but I think you will also have found a friendly new voice banging the drum for the global insurance industry's pivotal role in the global economy and London's unique role within it. Enjoy the podcast. Chris, welcome to the Voice of Insurance.
Delighted to be here, Mark. Thank you.
Well, I suppose technically, welcome back. I think you were part of a sort of panel discussion we did during the pandemic, but I suppose we've all tried to forget that.
Yeah, dark days. Stuck in our garages at home.
Absolutely. I learned a lot that day. I learned that, yes, you can't really do a podcast with about 6 people, all with background noise and their families sort of carrying on.
We've been in the days when my dogs used to snore in the background.
Oh, so your famous dogs. Yes, your dogs are a big part of your social media profile.
Yes.
I do remember.
Yeah.
Chris. Well, anyone who doesn't know you and who hasn't met your dogs yet, at least on social media, why don't you introduce yourself to us? Run us through your career today. How did you end up where you are running LIIBA?
Obviously by accident, because everyone says that in the insurance industry.
Well, it might be by design. Yes. You might be the first person to come on the show who's ever said, when I grew up, I said I wanted to represent the insurance industry.
Now, obviously, when I grew up, I wanted to play up front for Arsenal, but only one thing stopped me. I wasn't good enough.
So Malcolm McDonald was better, no? Yeah.
Frank Stapleton. But we digress. I left university with no real idea of what I wanted to do, as I think most people do. I'm deeply suspicious of people with structured career plans. So I was interested in politics and government, so I thought the civil service might be a good idea. And so I spent a year as an economist at the Department of Transport, privatising trains. So much of your last 40 years of misery has been directly my fault.
Of course, it's all going back the other way now.
Yeah, no, it was just because it was a really bad idea. And after a year of working on what was palpably a really bad idea, I found it too depressing. So I then spent 10 years in financial services regulation.
Doing the regulating? Or?
Yes, I worked for the Personal Investment Authority. And then
was that a formal regulatory body? Was it still pre-FSA informal?
It was still self-regulation, as they say. So it was all under the guise of the Securities and Investments Board, which, full disclosure, my father created the Securities and Investments Board. He was the first chief executive.
I think I did some of their exams a long time ago.
So financial regulation was sort of the family business in a way. And then, we got merged into the Financial Services Authority.
Were you more prudential or on the conduct?
It was more conduct. And one of the reasons why I think you end up spending a long time working in quasi-public sector jobs like that is because within reason at the FSA, if you just found something that was quite interesting, you could do it. And people didn't really try and stop you. So I started off in the residual FINBRA complaints department.
Wow.
Dealing with complaints against independent financial advisors who were so dodgy they'd yet to be admitted into the Personal Investment Authority membership.
Goodness. You forget about it when you created the FSA, which was probably Gordon Brown in 2000, around that time.
1997, it was bizarrely the first thing they did after winning the election was, things are going to get better. We've got a new financial services regulator.
Yeah, but it must have been a pain, suddenly inheriting a load of unregulated complaints.
Yes, yeah, how easily the general public are relieved of their life savings.
Because they trust people, yes.
Yes. There was one I had where a woman who'd basically been seduced by the sort of tea boy at an IFA in Cardiff, and he persuaded her to open joint bank accounts, and then, lo and behold, had just emptied them and disappeared, which was genuinely quite distressing because there was actually nothing we could do about it because it wasn't regulated business in any way. It was just a scam.
Because it was still fraud.
Yes. I mean, the police could have intervened. But a lowly complaints executive at the Personal Investment Authority was powerless, sadly.
So when did you get closer to insurance then?
So towards the end of my time at the FSA, I did do bits of work around the edges of them taking on responsibility for insurance brokers. And then I realised I'd nearly been there 10 years. And what you tend to see at the FSA was you'd get a new chief executive every now and again, and they'd come in with a new plan. And it was very much like the last plan, but it had to be, this was the Tyner plan, and it became very repetitive. So I experimented for a couple of years in consultancy, and we had a couple of small London market brokers as clients. So I was beginning to become aware of the existence of the London market, although I didn't know anything about it really. And then I was in Santa Fe in New Mexico the morning after the 2006 midterm elections, and my phone went very early in the morning because it would have been lunchtime here, and I ummed and ahed over answering it, and it was a recruitment consultant seeing if I was interested in a job in what was then the Market Reform Programme Office.
Oh, market reform, yes.
Which then gradually over the years morphed into becoming the LMG.
So market reform, yes, that produced the market reform contract, didn't
yes,
it? Which is the MRC, and that's still with us,
still with us, yes.
So you have a lasting legacy.
Yes, it's one of the true standards, or possibly the only real standard that we actually adhere to.
Is that fair to say that came in after 9/11 and there were contract certainty?
Yeah, it was MRC was really a reaction to contract certainty.
Yes, I remember.
So, yeah. And the idea that you should vaguely know which bits were in a slip.
Having been a broker and slightly worried, particularly, I remember when I was in Madrid, waiting 6 months for the cover notes to come back, and then if it was treaty wordings, goodness knows when, they just sat in the corner.
Yes.
Were we ever going to agree them? I don't know. I mean, it's sort of, we just keep going.
And all sorts of wording as previous and things like that used to be. So,
yeah.
So it brought some formality to the world of commercial insurance.
I think now you wouldn't have got away with that, would you? You need at least a translation of whatever the original Spanish wording was, yes. Or try and do a Spanish translation of the original English wording, of course, and then find that
the words aren't the same.
And also the sort of canon, Roman law doesn't really fit the English way of doing things.
I once came across someone who was making the case that one of the big issues in aviation is that the Russian word for demonstration flight is the same as their word for test flight. and yet this is quite an important distinction to make.
Oh, yes. And there's a Spanish one you see. In Spain, you don't really distinguish between clocks and watches because they tell the time. But if it does matter if it's, you think it's a whole load of grandfather clocks, or when it was actually a cargo Rolex watches, which are eminently nickable. Yeah. And very different risks. In fact, I think it's in everyone's E&O handbook somewhere there. So when did you join LIIBA? That was 2006.
No, I joined the LMG.
God, I'm sorry.
Market Reform Programme Office. Over time became the Market Reform Office because we dropped the P for some reason. And then the Market Reform Group, which it serviced, changed its name to the London Market Group. And I would say about 2011-ish, under the tenure of Barnabas Hurst Bannister as chair, as I recall. So I was at LMG until 2016. And back to your original point, over the course of my 9 years at LMG, the one job I came to cover was chief executive of LIIBA, because I did observe that certainly market modernisation and market discussions in general tend to be a game of two halves at the end of which the brokers win. And I fancied being on the winning side. And then serendipitously, David Huff decided to retire and offered me the job.
Yes, because David had been through the whole process. I think he'd been around for a long time since
David had
when it was still called the London Market Brokers Committee.
Yeah, well, it's been around in various guises since 1910.
Yeah.
David hadn't been there since 1910, but he had been there 35 years.
Yes.
Because I remember someone saying to me when I took the job, do you think you'll do it as long as him? And I said, I'll probably be dead before then.
So anybody who doesn't know LIIBA, now we know you a bit better. Specifically, actually, no, I need to clear this up. When did you exactly? So it's 2000...
January the 1st, 2016.
Good.
So to come January this year, I'll be 10 years in the job.
Excellent. LIIBA, for anyone who doesn't really know LIIBA, you could easily be forgiven for not knowing. What's it all about?
So London International Insurance Brokers Association, which is why we call it LIIBA. We are the trade association for Lloyd's accredited insurance brokers. So you have to be a Lloyd's broker to be a member of LIIBA. Slightly distressingly, you don't have to be a member of LIIBA to be a Lloyd's broker, but that said, about 98% of them are. So
You've done pretty well then.
yeah, we're relatively pleased with that. And we're a fairly traditional trade association, so we represent our members' interests to governments and regulators around the world, because the nature of the business that's done in London is it's as important what happens in the US as it is necessarily in the UK to our members. And we do a lot of work representing the voice of the broker and the voice of the client in discussions around central servicing in the market.
Yeah. What sort of split in terms of how much time do you think LIIBA does on international when you're sort of out in Brussels or in Washington, and how much time is with the sort of down and dirty London market stuff?
So the down and dirty London market stuff, so there are 7 of us. It's probably easier to talk about in terms of the team. So down and dirty London market stuff is James Livett's entire life, something that he revels in, ably supported by Steve Rourke and Amy Simmons. Jackie Giraud does a lot of delegated authority stuff, but she also leads our inclusion and culture work, which Amy also helps us with. And then Joe and Sophia run the place. And I swan off on nice trips pretending that I'm lobbying international bodies.
So you're the international...
I am international man, if that's a...
Right, yes, as I do follow you on social media, and I see you sort of, yes, at 5 o'clock in the morning, you're getting the first Eurostar out of town to get to Brussels for a big
it's
meeting.
Always a bad idea. But it's never a great start to the day.
You've recently put out an innovation report, the Innovation Imperative, I think. You correct me if it's wrong. We'll certainly have a link to this at the end of the podcast within the notes. What do you think are the biggest blockers for innovation?
So I guess the motivation for producing the report is over the nigh on 10 years now I've been doing this job and travelling around the world talking to regulators and governments. The one thing that is clear is that in general, governments and regulators don't understand what specialty brokers do. And they view us as sort of transactional purchasers of insurance on behalf of clients. And so they look at a distribution chain with more than one intermediary in it and assume that must be bad value.
Of course, yes. By the time you've gone through an extra pair of hands, you have to add a bit of extra brokerage because the more people do the work.
More people to pay. So what we see the result of that misunderstanding and thus underestimating the value of the broking role is poor public policy outcomes, poor supervisory strategies, and particularly restrictive licensing requirements around the world. So we wanted to produce something that would educate those people on what brokers actually do and the wide range of risk management services that they provide to their clients, but in a context that they would recognise, and they are all concerned about growing protection gaps in various parts of the economy. So that's the context that we've set it in. And what the conclusion, I guess, of the report is that actually it's in that relationship between the broker and client where risk identification happens, where risk modelling happens that allows you to understand the risk, where they work through various strategies for risk mitigation, one of which will be purchasing insurance. But I always say to governments quite often that actually, slightly ironically, one of our main tasks of our members is to persuade their clients not to buy insurance because they've found a cleverer way of mitigating the risk. That is where innovation happens in our industry. And yet it gets dismissed slightly as a distribution cost. And because the people see it as a cost.
Because it's just a higher number, it must be bad.
Yes, where actually it's an investment in research and development.
Do you see it's really mostly down to the broker to do the innovating? To at least do the convening and at least get things going?
Absolutely. And I think historically it has been. I think one of the things we call for in the report is more collaboration between brokers and carriers to provide better, more innovative solutions. We use the word solutions quite advisedly because it's about much more than products now. If you look at cyber is as much about resilience and containment as it is about writing a check at any particular point.
I think cyber would be a great example that you can really throw at those regulators and say, look, you really get it now, don't you? You've seen FTSE 100, Dow Jones Industrial Average companies being brought to an absolute standstill by cyber. Now you understand what this is all about. And this is also business that, if it wasn't for brokers, or intermediaries in some description,
Yeah.
it would never have existed.
No. And the huge numbers involved as well.
Without the brokers educating those clients that they're not going to buy the insurance that every government now understands that they really need. And if they don't buy the insurance, it's going to fall back on the state ultimately anyway.
Yeah, well, I think it is quite instructive that the co-op didn't purchase insurance despite being run by the former chief operating officer of Lloyd's of London.
Yes. Well, no comment there. And obviously in the UK, we've had Jaguar Land Rover, and immediately you can see state implications because there's state guarantees on loans to some of the suppliers that were down to their last, couple of pennies to rub together because they were supplying Jaguar Land Rover didn't need their parts for a while.
Yes, or probably did need their parts but didn't know what to do with them.
We just don't know what order to put them in yet. One thing about this, though, every other high added value professional, most of them are, when you go to a lawyer, they send you a bill and you wince and you think, actually, they are blooming good lawyers. They really saved me 100 times what that cost was. I mean, it's a bit painful to pay it, but I do recognise the value begrudgingly, etc. And the same with my accountants, my other consultants. What about with a broker? Do you think it would be easier if brokers all went to fee? Then you could see the fee and see the added value, and then there's not a percentage, then regulator can't really sort of moan about it.
Yes. I mean, obviously, the subject of broker remuneration is a delicate one for the chief executive of a broker trade association. I think fees allow you to more obviously tie revenue to effort as well, which is not necessarily always possible in a commission-based system.
You can sort of add hours.
Yes.
So this is this many
I
hours.
actually did this amount rather than it just happened to be an enormous premium. So
I've seen
or a
big
small
accounts,
one.
they have someone seconded to them all day, every day for years.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges, and I think it's important, whilst the report is obviously an attempt to promote the broking community, we should have some time for self-reflection. And I think one of the issues is that brokers haven't been particularly good at demonstrating their value. So every broker you speak to will swear blind that their claims advocacy achieves better outcomes for their clients. And if you ask them for any data about that, they go quite quiet. And there's a sort of bizarrely a slight lack of confidence sometimes you get about brokers being able to talk up
So we're
what
not
they
quite
do.
there yet.
Yeah. And you do also have the issue that so many risk managers in big corporations are former brokers, so really understand the system and game it a bit, and so would like to pay a fee for a particular placement because they know how much commission you might earn, but on other ones, similarly, they'll pay commission because they think that gets them a better deal. So
Yes.
that's one of the discussions we have with our
The nature
regulators.
of brokers often is that they will, once it's a fee and it becomes a number, they can then bid it down and down and down till it's almost zero, and then they realise they're not making any money.
And commission gets rebated to clients quite frequently.
Yeah. So you'd say we're not really there yet. Well, the market will work itself out because we've got sophisticated clients ultimately.
Yes.
If they demanded it, they'd probably that would happen.
Yeah, we are not living in a world where clients of LIIBA members don't understand how much they're paying for their brokerage needs.
Yeah, but they also understand the level of service they're getting, and obviously, if there was a lot of commission, there was no service, they'd move somewhere else.
Absolutely, yeah.
I also read your 2025 agenda, and it was a quite cheery, something unexpected.
If you can't start off the year cheery, Mark, where
Yeah,
are
exactly.
you?
I suppose you've got to put your best foot forward, be optimistic. But also, it was actually recognising something that is good, that we've had an attempt in the UK to make our regulators, our PRA and the FCA, but obviously most relevantly, the FCA here, to have that a secondary view around competitiveness of the UK financial services sector. So that agenda opens saying that your relationship with the FCA has rarely been more productive.
Yeah.
So now that you've got this really productive relationship, presumably you can pick up the phone, you can go and meet people and they're asking you what you need, or at least they're listening to you when you say you've got something you need rather than ignoring you.
Yeah.
Or saying, well, that's very interesting, but sorry, regulation.
Yeah.
What are you hoping to get out of that now that you've got this more productive relationship?
So ultimately, a more proportionate approach to how our members are treated and a genuine differential between the way commercial insurance brokers are regulated as opposed to personal lines brokers.
That's good.
Which we've not seen previously. And I think the work that we've been doing with the FCA over the last couple of years that culminated in its consultation around the simplification of insurance rules, and particularly a unified definition of what a consumer is, with the recognition that if you don't really deal with them, you should be treated a bit differently.
Yes, if your consumer is a retail broker in the US, how do you prove that they're treating their customers fairly? Is that really any of the business of a UK regulator? Well, you're a wholesale broker, for goodness sake.
And you shouldn't have to produce the sorts of disclosure documents that a member of the general public buying a motor insurance policy requires if you're placing the credit risk for Deutsche Bank.
Yeah, they're not widows and orphans.
So it's been progress at a theoretical level in terms of consultations and the forthcoming policy statement. We need to see in practice something different.
Presumably members still get odd visits from people saying, can you prove to me that you've treated everyone in Alabama fairly, please?
Yeah, and it's sort of quite random. But I guess one of our better kept secrets. So we have 150 groups of firms as members of LIIBA. Only 18 of them employ more than 100 people. Yeah. So by number, the LIIBA heartland is specialist small businesses who have a niche expertise, either in a particular line of business or a particular area of the world. So the majority of them, I think, rarely see the FCA or hear from them. But then you come across others who seem to have them around once a week, asking them awkward questions. And then obviously at the bigger end, they have someone sort of living with them, I think, which can be quite burdensome. There are executives that are larger members who have hundreds of meetings with the FCA a year.
Which seems crazy.
Yeah.
There's not many of them.
No.
So, yes, that's what you're hoping for, seeing a genuine recognition that something that's global and wholesale and that level of customer sophistication, a sophisticated buyer ultimately in that sort of language, isn't it?
Yeah.
That be recognised actually on the ground rather than maybe theoretically.
Just recognise that if you're a regulator whose central objective is to protect consumers, then you can not really have to bother with that because there aren't any consumers involved, and people who are involved are not the sorts of people you need to feel sorry for if something goes wrong.
Also, ultimately, there's probably also going to be real politics there is that, of course, they won't complain to you, will they?
No.
If they're not domiciled in the UK, they're not going to write a letter to the FCA, are they?
No.
Probably not.
No, they might go and complain
to their MP.
No.
So, yes, so those are the first things we want to build on. It's been quite refreshing with the new government, at least in terms of the rhetoric, of saying, I suppose, things go in waves, don't they? Once you have a financial crisis, you wouldn't expect after the financial crisis for a politician to stand up and start defending bankers, insurers, and anybody in the financial services because we were all being sort of flagellated. And that was a long time ago now. And now this is the first government who stood up and said, we want to promote growth in the UK economy and UK financial services in particular as well, because we know we're really good at that. So when you're standing in the lobby and, Rachel Reeves walks past and you say, Rachel, don't forget.
Yeah.
What are the things, when you've got your 15 seconds in the elevator pitch, what are you screaming the loudest?
So I think I said when we were talking about the report, one of the things that we wanted was to educate governments in how specialty broking works and why it adds value to an economy. Our government needs that education as much as any other. So I think it's fair to say we were fairly disappointed with their financial services strategy because they do talk a good game on growth and they do talk about valuing financial services and the London markets in particular. And yet they produced a set of proposals that entirely focused on insurers. And if you want to grow the insurance sector and the economy in general, then you need to focus on the people who generate the growth, and that's the broker intermediary section. And we generate growth in the insurance sector by bringing more business into the UK, but we also generate economic growth across the globe by providing the risk management services that allow companies to be more streamlined, less open to risk, so accessing cheaper financing, able to take more innovative decisions, and ultimately to be more productive contributors to the economy. So my 15-second would be, you need to focus on brokers, Rachel, and not necessarily some of the other things that you're proposing to do.
Okay, I'm focusing on brokers. What do you want me to do about brokers? Other than remind the FCA to differentiate. There are more than one type of broker.
One of the things that frustrates us is how uncoordinated UK trade policy is. So you have lots of people, you have lots of trade commissioners dotted around the world under the control of the Department for Business and Trade. You have embassies all over the world which are under the control of the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. And then you have Treasury who thinks that it's ultimately responsible for everything anyway. So it's a little bit of a bun fight between those three departments for who's really in charge of trade. So what you get is it's all a bit haphazard. And what we've said to them is you should be going out there and not just saying to foreign governments, you want to build a big wind farm, we've got experts in building wind farms, but saying we've got experts in building wind farms and we've got the people who can manage the risk of that program and make sure it's insurable. And if it's insurable, A, it will be delivered, but B, it will attract cheaper financing. And by the way, we've got quite a successful bunch of financiers here as well. And it could be a much more holistic pitch
Yes.
with us at the middle of it.
In InsurTech, you think, oh, that's quite interesting. We've negotiated this corridor, but it's just InsurTech.
Yeah.
What about all the other stuff?
Exactly.
We should have had a really broad corridor with Connecticut. Obviously, we're both joined at the hip.
Yeah.
We're both insurance towns.
Exactly.
And so we've got a huge amount in common. So, it's a shame it wasn't a broader idea.
Yeah. And hopefully they'll read our report and realise that insurance is at the heart of everything.
Well, absolutely. And we're at the heart of insurance. So it's all good. As we're digitizing this market and trying to innovate, a lot of the innovation these days seems to be coming from that ability to capture data, anonymize that data, and then start to see the insights in it and start to see, we have something we hadn't thought of, different correlations between different factors. Say, I don't know, everyone who has a green front door is worse than the people who have a red one. But those kind of things to start to see. Brokers tend to be quite reluctant to share data, or is that now incorrect of me to say that? But anyway, how are we going to get more of that going on? Again, at a LIIBA level, it sounds like the sort of place where you could convene a way of doing that everyone can live with.
Yeah, and actually it is one of the recommendations in our report is that we need to be better at sharing data if we're going to bridge the innovation gap that we identify there. And the parallel we draw is that actually the insurance industry is structured quite like the technology industry, in that in the technology industry you have big cloud service providers and then a whole myriad of systems integrators who use that foundation to develop innovative solutions for their clients, whereas we have big capital providers and a myriad of intermediaries who use that as a foundation to develop innovative solutions for their clients. Where we differ is probably in two things. I think the technology industry has got its head round the fact that failure is not always a bad thing in innovation, and that so long as you learn from failure, then it can be advantageous, and that's certainly something that needs to be instilled in the mindset of our regulators.
Yeah, I suppose the point of insurance is it's not supposed to fail. In our DNA, isn't it? We have to be naturally conservative because we just need to stay solvent, we need to pay claims, and whereas of course, the tech is like, that can fail, we can rip it up.
But we have vehicles that are less of a systemic threat, and MGAs can fail without an enormous impact on
the sandboxes and these sort of things.
And sandboxes. And the other part of what the technology industry does really well is share stuff. Everything's open source and it allows people to build on it. And I think that's a mindset.
If I was running an insurance broker, the last thing I think was, I must go off and make my own new version of Excel because it's slightly better.
Yes.
That's not a very big comparative advantage. I think you should just use Excel and learn how to use it really well.
Yes, and learn how to interpret it. And data's one thing, but information's another, and that's where your skill lies, is in the conversion of data to information.
Well, I suppose LIIBA was instrumental in setting up PPL.
You are speaking, Mark, to the man who filled in the first incorporation form for PPL.
Yes, it went to Company's House and did it.
Yeah, paid £45 of David Huff's money.
What about AI? This is another thing. I'm sure that's the thing that's giving most regulators palpitations, because obviously the thing about technology is it always seems to go so fast, and it's always faster than the regulators can catch up. Regulators are doing things about AI. What's your lobbying tactic with AI? Is it sort of to try and make them leave it alone? Or is it to say, no, really, we want you to engage and make a load of rules and then we know what the rails are to run our trains on? There is no regulation about AI and insurance at the moment.
No, and the FCA stance is that there's not going to be.
Oh, that's great.
So they are just going to remind people that they have existing rules around.
You still have to treat your customers fairly.
Exactly.
Really. And you have to know who your customer is.
And the medium by which you're doing it is irrelevant to the principle.
So it's the principle, yes.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yes.
Because as long as people remember to treat their customers fairly, then you can't go far wrong, can you?
No. And so when I get that first Eurostar of the day out, I'm usually going to a meeting of BPA, our European Federation. I'm a director of the European Federation of Insurance Intermediaries. And so my point, because the European Commission is looking darkly at the topic of regulation of AI, and there's probably going to be
they've already done
AI
something as well.
Directive, And I point them towards the FCA's attitude, and this is much better.
Maybe leave it alone, and just don't forget that good principles are going to really stand you in good stead here, because sort of the Ten Commandments, just don't stray from those and don't kill anyone, you'll be fine.
And as I say, the medium doesn't detract from the principle.
So on that level, I always remember every time I see you, and you've come back from Brussels, and I remember it was around Brexit when we talked about this an awful lot, because it showed up an enormous amount of all the ignorance that we had about what we thought the EU did and what it didn't do.
Yeah.
But there was no real European definition of what an insurance broker is as such. Is that right, Chris?
There's a definition of a distributor, because that's their word. which is sensible. There was an attempt to recognise that insurers did do distribution services as well.
But they're more thinking about tied agents, probably.
Yeah, which they have a lot of in Europe.
Yeah.
But I guess where there's the big difference between UK and EU regulators that does cause us an issue is in their interpretation of where activity takes place. So EU regulators say that if the risk and the policyholder are located in the European Union, then regardless of where you are physically, if you deliver a distribution service on that contract, you're delivering it in the EU and you need to be authorised to do that. And the FCA says if you're sat in London talking to an underwriter, you're delivering a distribution service in the UK and you need to be authorised to do that. And so if you are sat in London talking to an underwriter about a contract where the policyholder and the risk are located in the EU, you need to be dual authorised. I think I did refer to unhelpful licensing arrangements towards the beginning of this conversation.
It's been very good for Malta, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. I think the Maltese would beg to differ, so it's been wonderful. I think I don't know what percentage of your members may have a small office in Malta.
So the largest centre for LIIBA members by number is Brussels. The Belgian government were very proactive at the beginning in attracting business to Brussels as they saw the advantages of it. And it is, I believe, now true that one of our largest members is the largest payer of corporation tax in Belgium.
It's not bad, eh?
It's not been a bad thing for them. Yeah. Yes, they seemed to believe that the way to an insurance broker's heart was to run presentations at the rather fancy Belgian ambassador's residence in Belgravia at about 4:00 in the afternoon, followed by sampling some of their finer products in terms of their beer and their chocolate.
Lessons to be learned. If you want to be proactive to financial services, maybe roll out the red carpet, actually in somewhere that, that's nice, like Buckingham Palace or something.
Yeah.
But yes, are we much further down the line of this, getting rid of some of this, or some kind of equivalence?
Were I able to say yes? The answer is not really. Despite the change of government, the EU do still remain quite suspicious of the UK's motives. I mean, I think it genuinely came as a huge shock to them that we voted to leave, as it did to many of us. And I remember the early BPAR meetings after the referendum, their attitude, and this was something the UK people I don't think ever really took on board, but continental Europeans, if I can use that slightly hackneyed phrase, viewed the fundamental purpose of the EU was to stop us going to war again. It was something that was created in the wake of the Second World War to try and keep us all aligned and peaceful.
We'd never thought about that.
Yeah, and so when we voted to leave, they were like, well, you want to invade us then? So they fundamentally never understood why anybody would want to leave a union that was founded on that principle. So they do still overthink why we left, because it was a bit of a protest vote. So you get it in phrases. So how our members now service their EU clients is they have a subsidiary in the EU, which is authorised in the EU to satisfy EU regulators, which has a branch in London, and the entity is thus authorised also by the FCA to satisfy their interpretation of where activity takes place. And you go into meetings with EIOPA, the supervisory authority, or even with individual European regulators, and they'll ask you questions like, so what would happen if you lost contact with the branch? And I'm like, well, there aren't documents sitting around in filing cabinets. It's slightly more advanced like that. It'll all be in the cloud. So it's not really a concept that you could lose touch with the branch. But what they really mean is, what if you suddenly diverge so far from what we consider to be a responsible regulatory regime in some sort of dash for the bottom drive for growth, that we no longer considered you remotely responsible and wanted to stop all this happening? Because they're still thinking, well, they must have done it for something.
We hadn't thought about this part. That was not part of the campaign.
My next door neighbours, who are now in their late 80s, voted to leave. And they occasionally, when they come round at Christmas, will say things along the lines of, don't tell us we didn't know what we were voting for. And I said, well, how did you think that we would?
Was it about insurance brokers on the bus, the side of the bus?
Exactly.
Probably not. Yes, so it sounds like you're still in treacle.
Yes, treacle's not a bad thing. Yeah.
It's better than tar.
Exactly. One of the guiding principles of lobbying, certainly in the European Union, but I think generally, is to never ask a question you don't want the wrong answer to. So if you're stuck in treacle, at least you're somewhere.
Yes, you can put boiling water on treacle and it probably will dissolve, but yes, with tar won't.
We're in danger of taking the analogy too far.
That's my job. Yes, sorry about that, Chris. Close to home, again, some of your own publications said that your relationship with the Corporation of Lloyds, particularly around key infrastructure projects. How's it all going down? We've had another delay, Blueprint 2.
Yeah.
How's it going down with membership? Are you more resigned now?
Yeah, well, the first thing I should say is that it's quite natural for the relationship between the broking community and Lloyds to be fractious at times.
It's your job. It's not your job to just take the rules.
No. And sometimes they forget who their customers are, but they're better at not doing that. And certainly we've got a very good relationship with Patrick. We've got Charles Roxburgh coming to our board meeting this week. So the lines of communication are certainly there. We won't always agree on everything because that would be weird. But we do have a very healthy collaborative relationship. Blueprint 2, people have to remember what you're trying to do fundamentally with Blueprint 2. There is a reason why the systems at the core of these processes haven't been replaced for 45 years. It's because it's really expletive deleted, complicated, and no one's had the energy to even consider it for a long time. So it's not surprising that it's quite difficult. You're replacing multilateral net settlement engines, and if multilateral net settlement engines go slightly wrong and start sending the wrong bits of money to the wrong people, it could be quite disastrous.
And I always think this, we're talking about fast fail. This cannot fail. This is not fail. This is like air traffic control, switching over to a new system.
Exactly. And
nobody wants it to fail. No one wants to be the person who ultimately signs that off to say, you can imagine if you're the person who's responsible for signing that off, and you go back to the team and say, are you sure you're sure? And are you sure you're sure you're sure you're sure? Before you do it, you say, well, could we just wait another 3 months and a bit more extra testing? Because I know if it goes wrong, I really am out of a job.
Yeah. And you would also probably do the thing that Patrick's announcement did confirm they want to do, which is to keep the old system running for a few years whilst you're moving on to the new one, just in case.
Yes, people always blame journalists for this kind of thing, but it is that asymmetrical nature of news, that things that are supposed to work are supposed to work, and so it's not news that they work.
Yes.
Plane takes off without crashing. But when plane crashes, it's massive news everywhere and everyone wants to know. And so, yes, boring £100 billion premium system and 60-plus claim system works. It's not news.
No.
But when it doesn't work, it's total chaos. Yeah, we could be talking about insolvencies and lawsuits. Well, there will be lawsuits, we can guarantee that. And complete chaos.
No, absolutely. I mean, and genuine, that might be a systemic threat to the economy if that were to
It certainly wouldn't do our reputation as a marketplace. You could be banging the drum for London if you say, well, hang on a minute. If I send premiums to London, do I know, will I ever get my claim paid? Does they even know that I've sent it?
Yeah.
Do I get a policy number at the end of it? Well, if it's broken, then you won't.
Yeah. No. So quite difficult. And I think the announcement that Patrick made didn't come as a surprise to the people who were closely engaged in the programme. It needs testing. We need to take a time and we need to make sure it works.
Last time I had someone on the programme with someone who'd been in the heart of the technology space for a very long time. And he said, no, I would delay it even further and I would just make it really clear to everyone, we've got to do this and we've got to do it right and it's not going to be cheap. And we have to go for almost the luxury option here because there's absolutely no chance that this should be allowed to fail.
I would absolutely echo that. It's non-optional that we have to
because I think some of those core systems are written in languages that the last person who spoke that is sort of it's the computing version of Sanskrit or something. No one actually speaks it anymore.
And that might be their greatest security feature.
Oh, no, unhackable.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yes, but unfixable if they go wrong.
Yeah.
At that point, once the old sort of tape recorder or whatever, the sort of whirring machine stops whirring, then you've got a real problem. So you mentioned before one of the teams looking after diversity and inclusion, obviously, which has then moved into the regulatory sphere in quite a big way. Perhaps over the pond, the tide's turned on that. Is the tide likely to turn anywhere else? You're out on the sea. Can you see the tide turn or the wind changing at all?
I don't think so. I mean, I think FCO's made it pretty clear that culture within firms is something that they are very interested in, and I think they're right to. And I think one of the things that's, I suppose, slightly frustrating about it is, what is the best argument for diversity and inclusion? The best argument for diversity and inclusion is that there's swathes of data that show that more diverse companies make more money. So it's a commercially astute thing to do, as well as moral and sort of social mobility arguments in favour of it. So has the position of the Trump government had an influence on us? Yes, we can now call it inclusion and culture rather than diversity and inclusion because some of our larger members would prefer us not to use the word beginning with D. But we're still pursuing it as a major part of our work, which we do. I mean, sometimes people say, why is trade association do you get so involved in it? But it's back to a large majority of our membership are small businesses who just don't have the capability of running programs themselves. Who's got that in their
job title. They can't afford that.
So they can participate in some of our initiatives, take a couple of people on work experience or a couple of people.
You can help train them up and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So we work with a number of social mobility charities. So we sponsor 50 students through university through a charity called Upreach. They're all from very low income backgrounds, very high achievers, and you meet them and they're astonishing people. And we run a program with the King's Trust, as it now is, because it was the one thing he took with him. He liked it so much. Where we run a 2-week course called Get Into Insurance, which is targeted at people from underprivileged backgrounds who are no longer in full-time education. And the commitment at that, we've run them up until now in partnership with Howden. And the commitment is that you have to have at least positions, so at least a sort of 3-month work experience position for at least half the people on the course, so that they don't just get trained and then lose it all. And that's gone really well. So as a result of that, and we do some work with some other charities, I think we're approaching 50 full-time people now employed in the market who've come through one of our initiatives, which is
That's really good.
amazing, including fantastic. Mainly because I sat next to her at the Outreach Gala dinner. But Faduma, her mother is a Somalian immigrant, I think, and a quite large family. And she came through both the Outreach and the King's Trust programs. And she is now responsible for placing the insurance that keeps the Real Housewives of Cheshire on our screens. So not just a triumph for social mobility, but underpinning the core cultural fabric of the nation.
Coming to the end of my list of questions, do you think there's something I should have said, or that you wished you'd said that you haven't said yet? Something I should have asked you?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's quite exciting times for insurance brokers. Obviously, moving into a softer market is always a challenge, but one that they have got used to over the years. And hopefully, off the back of the report we've published, we can drive the knowledge in those who need it, that actually these people who really are at the core of how economies and nations work and deliver some quite good outcomes for people.
Well, I hope it does for brokers what that London Matters report did for the London market itself.
That was really our hope. So,
well, excellent. Well, we'll make sure that's linked to it in the notes. But it only remains for me to thank you so much, Chris. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this programme. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. The Voice of Insurance podcast is produced in association with Advantage Go, enabling enterprise-scale underwriting through a single pane of glass. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.